With the release of Season of the Wormcalled onto the live server, subclassing has come along with it. Subclassing allows a tank to get rid of some of their bad skill lines and replace them with better alternatives. With this video, I want to go over one of the easier options to take for a tank. Winter's Embrace from the Warden class. Winter's Embrace has a heavy focus on tanking passives and some more defensive-oriented buffs. Before subclassing, Warden tanks weren't seen as the most important thing to have in a group comp, as a Warden healer could cover everything a Warden tank could do. Winter's Embrace is in a weird spot as it's basically required in any group comp, and it's really not good for a healer to have, as most of the buffs in it are not really good for a healer. However, letting a tank take this line enables them to have a bunch of selfish options and one of the best skills in the game. Let's start off by looking at Frostcloak. Frostcloak is the main reason you'll end up taking this line. Winter's Embrace is basically a requirement for most comps because of this skill. It gives Major Evasion to every player in the group. Expansive Frostcloak. This increases the range from 20 meters to 36 and reduces the cost of the skill as it ranks up. While just increasing the range doesn't sound great, 36 meters is basically almost impossible to outrange. If someone outranges it, they're probably just in the wrong spot. You'll see when we start talking about the other morph that there's not really a reason to take the other morph over this one. Expansive Frostcloak just increases the range and makes the skill easier to use. Ice Fortress is the other morph of Frostcloak. It gives up the reduced cost and the increased range for minor protection. While on paper this seems decent, minor protection is one of the easiest buffs for a tank to source. Giving up on the ease of use for one of the easiest buffs to source just isn't normally worth it. Impaling Shards. Impaling Shards is a frost AoE placed at the player's feet that deals damage, snares enemies, and has a higher chance to proc the chilled status effect. As a tank, the damage is really not important, and the increased chance to apply chilled is nice, but not the most amazing thing in the world. Winter's Revenge is just Impaling Shards, but range and with offensive stat scaling. The benefits and downsides from Impaling Shards apply here, as the skills function identically, however one can be placed at range and one is placed at your feet. Gripping Shards. Instead of just snaring enemies, Gripping Shards immobilizes them for a short period of time. In certain content in the game, this immobilization can be very strong. However, content where enemies cannot be CC'd, there's really no reason to take this skill. Arctic Wind is a very strong self-heal for a tank. It applies a very strong initial burst with a hot that follows. Arctic Blast is probably the worst morph you can take as a tank. The burst heal is still there, however, if the skill does any damage to anything it hits, you will not be healed by the skill. The damage is nice and the stun is nice, however, not being able to consistently heal yourself makes the skill basically pointless. Polar Wind. Polar Wind is just Arctic Wind but better. Polar Wind increases the hot applied to you and it allows you to heal one ally near you with the initial burst for a lesser amount. This skill is another good reason to take this skill line, however it is for completely selfish reasons, as it doesn't provide really any group utility outside the little bit of healing you can do to other group members. Crystallized Shield is a massive ranged only damage shield. If you get hit by a ranged attack, you will absorb it and you gain 2 ultimate. This 2 ultimate is very nice and it's a unique source, so it stacks with things like major and minor heroism. Speaking of major heroism, we have Shimmering Shield. Shimmering Shield is just Crystallized Shield, however you gain major heroism every time you absorb a projectile. While on paper this sounds amazing, trample does exist. Crystallized Slab is something I want to look at a little bit more. You have a lot larger shield and you technically reflect the projectile, except not really. Instead of reflecting projectile, you absorb it and then shoot another projectile at them, dealing damage based on your stats. The reason I want to talk about this is defensive stance is a thing. Defensive stance is a smaller shield and will not hit 3 projectiles back, however it will send the actual projectile back, dealing whatever damage it would have dealt to you to the enemy. Enemies in ESO can end up dealing a very large amount of damage, meaning this projectile can actually hit very hard, while Crystallized Slab is just stuck with a certain effect based on your stats. Lastly, we have Frozen Gate. Frozen Gate is a pull, however it does have one unique interaction. It can pull things that have not fully rendered on your screen or are not targetable. If they have spawned, it will attempt to pull stuff even if you cannot see them. This skill is one of the many reasons Wardens were very strong in Black Rose Prison, as you could put the pole underneath them, and if you knew their spawns, you could actually pull almost every wave instantly to the center of the arena or wherever you were. Frozen Devices. Frozen Devices is just Frozen Gate, however it applies Major Maim. Major Maim is a very strong debuff, however it is very easy to source most of the time, and it should be passively upkept by this tree, however we'll see later that it's not. Lastly, for the morphs, we have Frozen Retreat. Frozen Retreat is basically the best tool to troll your teammates that you can possibly have. Give them a synergy and they'll be teleported straight to you, no matter where you are. I don't think it'll allow you to pull them across a gap. However, if you are standing, let's just say, in an AoE that will one-shot them, but not you, well, there you go, they're now dead. On to the passives of the Winter's Embrace tree. I'm going to do these out of order and from worst to best. Starting off, we're going to look at Glacial Presence. While it is a good passive, it's just not great in the terms of tanking. You have an increased chilled status effect chance, which is probably already going to be close to 100% anyway, so this doesn't really do much, and it increases the damage of the chilled status effect by a small amount. I say a small amount, however, this damage is applied to the base damage of the chilled status effect, meaning it can make this effect do very high damage with enough multipliers. Just look at Infinite Archive if you want an example. The next passive is Icy Aura. This should be the best passive in here, however, it just doesn't work 99% of the time. When an enemy is within the melee range and dealing direct damage, they apply a stack of Bite of Winter. This can stack up to 5 times, and at 5 stacks, they are given Major Maim for 3 seconds. On paper, this should sound amazing. Major Maim is an extremely strong debuff, and you get it passively from just doing your job and standing there taking hits. The problem occurs when you see that there is a 3-second maximum for the timer, and enemies have a really weird propensity to just RP forever. So you might get some uptimes out of this, however you will not get very good uptimes out of it, as sometimes enemies just decide they don't want to hit you. Next up is Frozen Armor. Frozen Armor is what you make out of it. If you are already at resistance cap, you can take some stuff out of your resistances elsewhere and get it from here, as you will almost always be using 2 skills from the skill line. If you cannot find a good way to reduce your resistances to make this passive worth it, then you will just basically be getting nothing out of it. The only real downside to this, besides if you're already at resistance cap, is if you double stack 2 skills on 1 bar. This will force 1 bar to be at higher resistances than the other, and if you build around specifically those resistances, 1 bar will be lower, though it shouldn't make that big of a difference. And the best passive in here is Piercing Cold. Piercing Cold increases your frost damage by 15%, but that's not the reason we care. It also increases the damage you can block by 8%. There is no trigger for this, and you have to do nothing besides put 4 skill points into the passive. This just increases your block mitigation by 8% passively. While technically you could use the same argument as resistances, as block mitigation does have a cap, you will basically never get there under normal circumstances. Overall though, the passives and active skills for the skill line are very suited to what a tank wants to do. Along with this, you are able to take this line off of a healer, giving them access to the plethora of other very strong healing skill lines. Lastly, and certainly least, is Sleetstorm. Sleetstorm gives major protection to all of your allies for 8 seconds. This is actually very strong, however the other effect is you snare them by 40%. This is the biggest waste of an ultimate ever. If you are using an ult to snare something, it's just a waste. There's really no reason to run this for the major protection alone, as other support ults will do the job just as good, and there's something called Glyphic. I don't want to go over the morphs for too long, but Northern Storm is the DPS option as it increases in damage every second for 12. And the other morph, Perafrost, is just, you now apply chilled every tick, which again is nice, but you are using an ultimate to do something that you can already do with other skills. But I hope you enjoyed this video. It's going to be interesting to see how the meta develops around all of this stuff, but for the most part, a tank is going to be using this. There's really no reason not to. It has one of the best burst heals in the game and one of the most important skills in the game within the skill line. Along with that, there are a couple of very strong niche options with gripping shards and crystallized shield. Actually, it's called shimmering shield. I just read that. I am really stupid, but yeah. And again, if you want to troll your teammates, you have Frozen Retreat, and if you want to do Black Rose Prison, you have Frozen Device, which is just a really good pull for that. However, in most content, you're going to see someone using this. Frostcloak does not need to be on both tanks, however, one tank using it is very good. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed the video, and thanks for watching.